Within the city and county of Swansea, there are many streets with various names. Some of the streets are named after people. We are going to look at several of those names in alphabetical order and find out who they were. Beche Road, Sketty, was named after Sir Henry Thomas Beche, who was born in Welbeck Street, Cavendish Square, London. He was the only son of Thomas and Elizabeth Beche. The family name was originally Beche, but his father changed it to create a fictional connection with the medieval barons Beche of Aldworth, Berkshire. His father served as a brevet major, later lieutenant colonel, in the Norfolk Fencible Cavalry Regiment and officer in the British Army, and was a slave owner with an estate in Jamaica. In the 1800s, the family travelled to the plantation in Jamaica when Henry Thomas Beche inherited the estate. His father died there in the following year. Mother and son returned to England by sea and were shipwrecked to the north of San Domingo during their journey. Beche spent his early life living with his mother in Lyme Regis, where he acquired the love of geology through his friendship with Mary Anning. At the age of 14, he entered the Royal Military College, then at Great Marlow in Buckinghamshire. The Peace of 1815, however, changed his career, and at the age of 21, Beche joined the Geological Society of London. He became an avid fossil collector and illustrator, collaborating with William Convera on an important paper on ichthyosaur and plesiosaur anatomy that was presented before the Society in 1821. He continued throughout his life to be one of the most active, useful, and honoured members, serving as president of the Society from 1848 to 1849. He visited many localities of geological interest, not only in Britain, but also in France, Jamaica, and Switzerland. In Jamaica, he stayed in his estate Hal's Hall, Clownton Parish, between 1823 and 1824, where he published his geological account of Jamaica in 1827. Returning to the southwest of England, he began the detailed investigation of the rocks of Cornwall and Devon. Contact with the mining community of that part of the country gave him the idea that the nation ought to compile a geological map of the United Kingdom and collect and preserve specimens to illustrate and aid in further developing its mineral industries. The government then appointed Beche to work with the Ordnance Survey. This formed the starting point of the Geological Survey of Great Britain, which was officially recognised in 1835 when Beche was appointed as director. In 1837, Beche moved his geological survey to Swansea, recognising the economic importance of the Welsh coalfield. He soon became involved in the local scientific scene as a member of the Swansea Philosophical and Literary Institution and a friend of the Swansea naturalist Lewis Weston Dillwyn. As the first director of the Museum of Practical Geology in Jermyn Street in 1843, he donated many of his own books to establish the library. Increasing stories of valuable specimens began to arrive in London, and the building at Craig's Court off Whitehall, where the Young Museum of Economic, afterwards Practical Geology, was placed, became too small. Beche appealed to the authorities to provide a larger structure and to widen the whole scope of the scientific establishment of which he was the head. Parliament sanctioned the erection of a museum in Jermyn Street, London, and the organisation of a staff of professors with laboratories and other appliances. The establishment, in which were combined the offices of the Geological Survey, the Museum of Practical Geology, the Royal School of Mines, and the Mining Record Office, was opened in 1851. Conditions of scientific testing were rudimentary as part of his colleague Lyon Playfair's investigations into overflowing privies. Sir Henry Beche once took the role of test vomiter to judge sewage flow. In 1830, Beche published Sections and Views, illustrative of geological phenomena, a series of line drawings to encourage more accurate depictions of geological formations. He also published numerous memoirs on English geology in the transcriptions of the Geological Society of London, as well as in the memoirs of the Geological Survey, notably the Report of the Geology of Cornwall, Devon and West Somerset in 1839. He likewise wrote a geological manual and researches in theoretical geology, in which he enunciated a philosophical treatment of geological questions much in advance of his time. An early volume, How to Observe Geology, was rewritten and enlarged by him late in life and published under the title of The Geological Observer. Beche was the principal antagonist of Roderick Murchison and Adam Sedgwick in what had been labelled the Great Devonian Controversy. He frequently used cartoons as a tactful way to express his frustrations on this and other issues. He was elected Fellow of the Royal Society in 1819 and was knighted on the 13th April 1842, and, near the close of his life, he was awarded the Wollaston Medal. In 1852, he was elected a foreign member of the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences. After his death, students at the Royal College of Mines and other institutions competed for the bursary of the Beche Medal. The medal was in fact the second imprint of a medal Beche had originally had engraved and struck for the slaves he inherited from his father on the plantation in Jamaica on his return to Lyme Regis in 1825. The second version of the medal in silver and bronze was engraved by William Wan of the Royal Mint, with Beche's portrait on one side and the plantation on the other, the plantation being replaced with crossed hammers for the School of Mines. In June 2020, the Beche Society, a student-run geology society at Imperial College, announced they were distancing themselves from Henry Beche because of his legacy as a slave owner. They renamed themselves the Imperial College Geology Society, pending consultation on a permanent new name. Henry Beche is buried in the Kensal Green Cemetery, London.
Elizabeth Amy Dillwyn, or Amy Dillwyn as she was known, was an industrialist, novelist, businesswoman and social benefactor. Born in Park Wen, Gower Road, Sketty, Swansea on the 16th May 1845, she was one of the first female industrialists in Britain, the daughter of Lewis Llewellyn Dillwyn and Elizabeth, née Beche. One of 4 children, her oldest sister, Mary, was born in 1839, brother was born in 1843, and younger sister Sarah was born in 1852. Her uncle was John Dillwyn Llewellyn of Pentlager, who, along with his wife Emma Thomasina Talbot, his sister, Amy's aunt Mary Dillwyn, and his daughter Amy's cousin, Teresa Story Maskelyne, née Dillwyn Llewellyn, were pioneers of early photography. Her paternal grandfather was the naturalist Lewis Weston Dillwyn, and her maternal grandfather was geologist Henry Beche. The Dillwyn family were originally Quakers, and her great-grandfather was William Dillwyn, the anti-slavery campaigner from Pennsylvania, USA, returned to the UK to campaign in Britain. Her father was a Liberal MP between the years 1855 to 1892, and he was the owner of the Dillwyn Works at Havard, Swansea. In February 1864, her fiancé Llewellyn Thomas of Llanmadog died of smallpox shortly before their wedding. When her mother died in 1866, Amy, now 20, became the mistress of Hendrefoylen House, which she reluctantly accepted. She had no experience to do this, but she soon got to grips with running such a large household, even dealing with the quarrelling servants. She also acted as her father's companion in many of his engagements in Swansea and London. In 1866, she received a message saying that people who lived by the commercial inn, Calais, were suffering from cholera. So she went into the village, visiting the ill people, and gave them beef tea, chicken broth, and jelly. And against the advice of the local doctor, she fed the ill people herself. She then went to Sketty to see an elderly lady, Betsy Lewis, who was suffering from typhoid. Amy gave her beef tea and barley water. The lady was also in debt to a clothing club run by local women who wanted her removed from the list. But Amy made sure she was kept on the list and even took her an orange to eat, which, of course, was a rare fruit at the time. A few months later, Amy visited a Mrs. Isaacs. Mrs. Isaacs' daughter's baby had just died, and Amy went into the kitchen of the house where the baby lay on the kitchen table. Amy was able to console and offer her sympathies to Mrs. Isaacs, who said that the visit of Amy had made her feel better. Amy Dillwyn was also a competent and skilled writer, publishing 7 novels and a handful of short stories and poems. She was a regular reviewer of The Spectator and a contributor to the periodical The Red Dragon, the national magazine of Wales. Her first novel was the Rebecca Rioter, The Story of Calais Life. Her second novel, Chloe Argwell in 1881, was a satire of the ruling class. In 1883, she published A Burglary or Unconscious Influence. Her fourth novel, Jill, published in 1884, was a commercial success. She then wrote Jill and Jack in 1887. Nant Ulfa appeared in the Red Dragon National Magazine of Wales, and she published Maggie Steele's Diary in 1892. Following the deaths of her brother in 1890 and her father in 1892, she lost the family home in Hendrifoelyn due to it going to the male line in accordance with the custom at the time. At the funeral of her father, she wore a bright purple skirt with a yellow rose in her belt and flowers in her hat, making a statement against the Victorian conventions of elaborate funerals, which could cause families to get into debt by buying mourning clothing. Amy Dillwyn was evicted from Hendrifoelyn and she moved into lodgings at West Cross, Swansea. She did inherit her father's spelter business, but also inherited the debts that came with it, which was over £100,000. Amy was determined to save the works and also keep the 300 workers in employment. To do this, she lived on the minimum of wages and worked hard for 4 years and eventually paid off her father's debts, and her works thrived. She was now able to move from her lodgings and bought a house called Teague Lynn, Mumbles Road, West Cross. In 1905, she sold her works to a German company and made a profit. She was involved in many civic roles in Swansea, organising committee of the National Eisteddfod held at Swansea in 1906, chairman of the hospital board, supporter of the militant Women's Freedom League. When the National Union of Women's Suffrage Societies was formed at the turn of the century, Amy Dillwyn joined as one of the earliest supporters in Wales. She campaigned in support of dressmakers of Ben Evans' store, Swansea, who went on strike in 1911. Amy Dillwyn was also active in Liberal politics well into her 80s. She was known for her somewhat unconventional clothing and often seen smoking a cigar and wearing a trilby hat, her mark of her own individuality. She died in Swansea on 13th December 1935 at the age of 90. She was cremated in Pontypridd and her ashes laid to rest in the churchyard at St Paul's Church, Sketty, Swansea, next to her parents and her brother Harry. Her house, Teague Lynn, still stands on Mumbles Road, West Cross, and on its boundary wall there is a blue plaque dedicated to Amy Dillwyn. William Gammon Drive is named after Mumbles lifeboat coxswain William Gammon, who was born in Mumbles in the 1900s. Oistmar School pupils had picked the name of the drive to be named after William Gammon in honour of his dedication to the Mumbles lifeboat station and the fact he had lost his life while serving on the Mumbles lifeboat. He came from a family who have had connections with the Mumbles lifeboat since 1903. During World War I, William was a member of the Royal Navy Reserves, and after the war, he returned to Mumbles. On Wednesday, the 23rd April 1947, William Gerbert Davis, the Mumbles lifeboat mechanic, fired the maroons from the lifeboat cottage at Southend to signal the rescue of a vessel, SS Santampa, which had sailed from Middlesbrough, most of the 39 crew coming from the Teesside area. The vessel was in grave danger in storm-force winds near Porthcawl. Members of the lifeboat crew dashed down to the boathouse. Such was the weather they struggled to stand upright in the strong winds and rain gusting across the pier gangway. The coxswain of the lifeboat, William John Gammon, hold of the RNLI's highest award, a gold medal, for leading the rescue of 42 officers and crew from a torpedo-damaged Canadian freight caught in a storm off Port Talbot in October 1944. When the lifeboat, Edward, Prince of Wales, launched into the gale-force wind, driving rain and rough seas, her 8-man crew were coxswain William John Gammon, second coxswain William Noel, mechanic William Gerbert Davis, RNLI bronze medal holder, assistant mechanic Ernest Griffin, bowman William Richard Schofield Thomas, William Ronald Thomas, William Noel's brother-in-law, Richard Smith, due to be married in 3 days, and William Lewis Howell. The lifeboat Edward, Prince of Wales, had been at the Mumble since 1924, during which time she and her crew had helped to rescue over 190 men. The crew knew and liked their lifeboat. November 1946, the RNLI had promised a new boat for the station. The then bowman, Tom Ace, remarked, "If she is as good as this one, we will be satisfied. We could go to America in this one." The Edward, Prince of Wales was an open boat, fitted with an engine, but no radio. The SS Santampa, a 700-ton Liberty ship built in 1943, was on her way to Newport from Middlesbrough. Her captain was a New Zealander, but nearly 3/4 of the crew of 39 were from north-east England. Battling the storm in the Bristol Channel, the Santampa, imbalanced and difficult to handle in the strong winds and rough seas, it became unmanageable and drifted towards Nash Shoal near Porthcawl. Putting down anchors, Captain Sherwell sent several increasingly urgent messages for assistance, and the Coast Guard requested the launch of the Mumbles lifeboat. The last signal was given 10 minutes after the lifeboat had launched. The Coast Guard received Santampa's latest position. Auxiliary Coast Guard Eric Michael signalled to the lifeboat using an Aldis lamp. But despite being 123 feet or 37 metres above sea level in the Coast Guard station, they were losing sight of the lifeboat in the troughs of the waves. Unsure of the signal, coxswain Gammon turned the lifeboat around and headed back to the boathouse slipway to hear the information shouted via a loud hailer. The crew set off once more into the storm. Soon Edward, Prince of Wales, was no longer visible from the shore at Southend. Nothing more was seen or heard of the lifeboat and her crew that night. At Sker Point near Porthcawl, Captain Sherwell and his crew were unable to prevent the Santampa from going ashore. The ship's anchor chains broke, and she was driven by the violent winds and rough seas onto the rocks of Sker Point, which was a jagged, rocky plateau that rose sharply some 25 feet or 6.72 metres from a small beach. The plateau was only covered by the sea when very high tides combined with rough weather. Pounded by 30 feet or 9 metre waves in an exceptionally high tide, the Santampa broke into 3. The bow and stern sections were thrown up onto the plateau. The middle section with engine room and crew remained on the beach in deeper water. Throughout the stormy night, lit by car headlights, the police, coast guards, ambulance crews and many helpers watched in vain for any survivors from the wrecked ship only 300 yards or 274 metres away. They knew that Edward, Prince of Wales, was on her way, so they watched out for her. In Mumbles they waited anxiously all night in the empty boathouse, feared the worst when, By dawn, there was no news. By 3 a.m, the tide at Sker had ebbed, allowing rescuers to scramble over the slippery, oil-coated rocks with twisted spears and steel hawsers, searching in vain for survivors. When light came, they discovered Edward, Prince of Wales, upside down on rocks 500 yards or 457 metres away. Later that day, the bodies of the lifeboat crew were found, the life jacket correctly fastened. All 39 men of the Sam Tampa had been lost, and the 8 men of the Mumbles lifeboat had given their lives attempting to save them. Mumbles was stunned. Hundreds of miles away, the people of Middlesbrough, Whitby, Stockton-on-Tees, Staves and Redcar were devastated by what the Middlesbrough Gazette called one of the worst disasters within living memory for the seafaring community of North Yorkshire and South Durham. Disaster funds were immediately opened to help families of both crews, with donations from all over the world. What happened to Edward, Prince of Wales, on her final service could not be known for certain, but RNLI inspectors concluded an exceptionally big sea around high water had capsized her, throwing the crew overboard. The lifeboat was driven by the high tide, bottom upwards, over the submerged rock plateau, where she remained when the sea receded. The funeral for the Mumbles lifeboat crew was on the 29th April. On the day of the funerals, there was relentless rain, but thousands lined the streets of Mumbles to pay their respects. Schools, shops and businesses were shut, curtains drawn and flags were at half-mast on buildings and boats anchored in the bay. After the church service, the flag-covered coffins were placed on a tender provided by Royal Air Force St Athan. Led by Swansea Police and the Salvation Army bands, the funeral cortege of Mumbles lifeboatmen, supported by colleagues from Tenby and Ferryside, Coast Guard, representatives of the RNLI, Merchant and Royal Navies, the British Legion, Glamorgan Police, local authorities and many other organisations and individuals moved slowly up Newton Road to Oystermouth Cemetery. The 8 men were solemnly laid to rest, the last post sounded and poppies were cast into the graves. The following is an extract from the memoriam to the crew. On the 23rd of April in 1947, when Mumbles faced her peril with her 8 heroic men, the news it came, the signal gun, an SOS was sent. The young, the old, yes, all in one, to the Mumbles lifeboat went. For the long lurid tempest cloud had brooded o'er waves, a reinforcing gale was roused to leave its secret caves. But down the slip, the lifeboat went with heroes holding fast, as every mighty billow seemed more dreadful than the last. And who shall tell the agony that those great souls did bear, as they fought the tempest willingly, devoted of fear and care? We strained our eyes to see her go, with her trusty hands on deck, heading for the Porthcawl shore and the St Tampa wreck. We waited there in hope and fear, and prayed to God above, and thought of children held so dear, and the woman folk they love. 'Tis morn, our anxious eyes can trace no vessel on the deep. In silence, looking face to face, we stood about to weep. Is it in vain? What demons bind our coxswain and her crew? Will the maddest cruel lashing winds bring our lifeboat back to view? This foaming monster hurries on, impatient of its prey, crashing its mighty waves upon our lighthouse and the bay.
Field Marshal Francis Wallace Grenfell, 1st Baron Grenfell, GCB, GCMG, PC, was born in Swansea on the 29th of April 1841. Born the son of Pasco St. Leger Grenville and Catherine Anne Grenfell, and grandson of Pascoe Grenville, he was educated at Milton Abbas School in Dorset, but decided to leave school early. Grenville purchased a commission as an ensign in the 3rd Battalion of the 60th Royal Rifles on the 5th of August 1859. He then purchased promotion to lieutenant on the 21st of July 1863 and then to captain. He became aide-de-camp to Sir Arthur Cunningham, Commander-in-Chief, South Africa, in 1874. After taking part in the Battle of Quintana in February 1878 during the 9th Hosa War, he was promoted to brevet major on the 11th of November 1878. He next fought at the Battle of Ulundi in July 1879 during the Anglo-Zulu War, and then returned to England to become brigade major at Shorncliffe Army Camp shortly before he was promoted to brevet lieutenant colonel on the 29th of November 1879. He became brigade major of an infantry brigade in South Africa in April 1881, and having been promoted to the substantive rank of major on the 1st of July 1881, he fought at the Battle of Tel el-Keba in September 1882 during the Anglo-Egyptian War. He was promoted to brevet colonel on the 18th of November 1882 and was made aide-de-camp to Queen Victoria that same year. Grenfell became Deputy Sirdar, Commander-in-Chief of the Egyptian Army in late 1882, and after commanding the Egyptian troops stationed at Aswan during the Nile expedition, he became Sirdar himself in April 1885. He was appointed Companion of the Order of the Bath on the 25th of August 1885, and having led his troops at the Battle of Guinness in December 1885, was promoted to the substantive rank of Lieutenant Colonel on the 7th of January 1886. He was advanced to Knight Commander of the Order of the Bath on the 25th of November 1886. He went on to become Sirdar Commander-in-Chief of the Egyptian army and commanded the forces at the Battle of Suakin in December 1888 and at the Battle of Toski in August 1889 during the Mahdist War. He was promoted to Major General for distinguished service in the field on the 3rd of August 1889, in recognition of the transformation he had achieved in making the Egyptian army a successful fighting force. Subsequently, he was appointed a Knight Grand Cross of the Order of St. Michael and St. George on leaving Egypt on the 25th of May 1892. Returning to England, Grenville became Deputy Adjutant General at the War Office in 1892 and Inspector General of Auxiliary Forces at the War Office in August 1894. He returned to Egypt to command the British forces there under the new Sirdar in 1897, and having been promoted to Lieutenant General on the 1st of April 1898, he was advanced to the Knight Grand Cross of the Order of the Bath on the 15th of November 1898. He became Governor of Malta with the local rank of General on the 1st of January 1899, serving as such until early 1903. The 1902 Coronation Honours List on the 26th of June 1902 included his name as a future peer, and he was created Baron Grenville of Kilvey in the county of Glamorgan on the 15th of July 1902. He took the oath on meeting in the House of Lords for the first time on the 22nd of July 1902. After returning permanently to the United Kingdom, he went on to command the newly created 4th Army Corps in April 1903, and having been promoted to full general on the 16th of March 1904, he became Commander-in-Chief, Ireland, and General Officer commanding the 3rd Army Corps in May 1904. He was promoted to Field Marshal on retirement on the 11th of April 1908. In May 1910, he attended the funeral of King Edward VII, and in June 1911, he attended the coronation of King George V. Grenfell served as Colonel of the 1st Surrey, or South London, Regiment. He served as Colonel of the 2nd Regiment of Life Guards, and then Colonel of the 1st Regiment of Life Guards, as well, latterly, Colonel Commandant the King's Royal Rifle Corps, and Colonel of the King's Own Malta Regiment of Militia. He was Governor and Commandant of the Church Lads Brigade from 1908 to 1925. In 1914, he was responsible for raising the 16th Service Battalion, King's Royal Rifle Corps, or Church Lads Brigade, as a battalion for CLB members wishing to enlist. He was also a founding committee member of the Pilgrim Society in 1902. Grenfell received the honorary freedom of the borough of Swansea town in 1889. Whilst Grenfell was in Egypt, he was visited by his sister, Mary Grenfell, who encouraged him in his pursuits of archaeology and Egyptian history. He then enlisted the help of archaeologist Wallace Budge, who was instrumental in purchasing a mummy and its coffin, together with other smaller items, for the Royal Institution of South Wales, which is the former name of Swansea Museum. The mummy, identified as Hor, was a clothier priest and scribe of the god Atum. In the daily ritual of the temple, it was his duty to change the clothing on the holy statue of this god. Hor lived in Akhmim in Upper Egypt between 250 to 200 BC during the Ptolemaic dynasty, and he was named after the god Horus. The mummy was gifted to Swansea Museum in 1888 by Francis Grenfell and can be seen to this day at Swansea Museum in the Egyptian Gallery. Field Marshal Lord Francis Grenfell died aged 83 at Windlesham in Surrey on the 27th of January 1925. He was buried at St Mary and All Saints Churchyard at Beaconsfield in Buckinghamshire.
Griffith John was born on the 14th December 1831 in the Greenhill area of Swansea. He was a Welsh Christian missionary and translator in China and a member of the Congregational Church. He was also a pioneer evangelist with the London Missionary Society, writer and translator of the Holy Bible into the Chinese language. Both his parents died in separate cholera outbreaks when he was a young boy. He was brought up a Christian in the Congregational tradition, and in 1840, at the age of 8, was admitted to full membership of Ebenezer Congregational Church, Swansea. At the age of 14, he delivered his first sermon at a prayer meeting, and at 16 he became a regular preacher and was known as Boy Preacher. He trained at the Brecon Congregational Memorial College for the ministry and then at the Benford Academy. In 1853, he offered his services to the London Missionary Society, and after 2 years' training was ordained in 1855 at Ebenezer, Swansea. That same year, he married his first wife, Margaret Jane, a daughter of the Christian missionary David Griffith. After he was ordained, he wanted to serve in Madagascar, but was instead persuaded by the London Missionary Society to go to China. With his wife, he made the voyage to Shanghai, arriving there in September 1855. Griffith John would serve in China for 55 years, chiefly in Hubei and Hunan. He made extensive missionary journeys into the interior of China, sometimes travelling over 5,000 kilometres. He was among the first to begin Christian missionary work in the provinces of Hubei, Hunan and Sichuan. He set up schools, hospitals and training colleges with a permanent base at Hankou, now part of Wuhan City. In 1861, he went from Shanghai through the provinces of central China, and he later claimed that with his compatriots had established over 100 mission stations in Hubei and Hunan. In July of that year, he had moved to Hankou, which remained his base until his final departure from China in 1912, although in 1863 he was in neighbouring Wuchang district and in 1867 Hanyang district. He was fluent in Chinese and a powerful and elegant speaker. He trained numerous Chinese evangelists and wrote numerous Christian tracts and served for many years as chairman of the Central China Tract Society. His wife suffered from ill health, and in 1870 they left China to return to Britain. Unfortunately, Mrs. John died in Singapore during the return voyage. In 1874, John met and married Mrs. Jenkins, a missionary's widow, but in 1885 she also died. In 1890, he became a founding member of the Permanent Committee for the Promotion of Anti-Opium Societies. Fellow committee members were prominent missionaries John Glasgow Kerr, MD, American Presbyterian Mission in Canton, B.C. Attenbury, MD, American Presbyterian Mission in Peking, Archdeacon Arthur Evans Mowell, Church Missionary Society in Shanghai, Henry Whitney, MD, American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions in Fuzhou, the Rev. Samuel Clark, China Inland Mission in Qiyang, and the Rev. Arthur Gostick Shorrock, English Baptist Missionary in Taiwan. They resolved to continue their opposition to the opium traffic, urging Christians in China to arouse public opinion against it. The desire of the missionaries that their ideas be carried out caused them to form continuation committees that were assigned the task to assure that actions would be taken on whatever matters had been approved by the conferences. John published a New Testament in 1885 using Wen Li Literary Chinese. In 1889, he published a second New Testament translation, this time using Mandarin Chinese. He continued translating other portions of the Old Testament into Mandarin Chinese, such as Psalms and Proverbs. In 1889, he was elected chairman of the Congregational Union of England and Wales, but declined the honour and remained in Hankou among the Chinese, whom he loved. In the Yangtze Valley, he founded a theoretical college for Chinese preachers, which is named after him. The University of Edinburgh made him a Doctor of Divinity in 1889 in recognition of his service to the Chinese. In 1905, he celebrated his missionary jubilee at Hankou. Due to ill health, he left China for a short time, but returned to China in 1907. During a career spanning 60 years, he left China on 3 occasions. He finally returned to Britain in January 1912. He died in London on the 25th July that year. Griffith's John was buried at Bethlehem Chapel at Carnglass Road, Sketty, Swansea. In 2012, a bust of Griffith's John by sculptor Jian Jingo was offered to Ebenezer Church and is now in Swansea Museum. It was a gift from the Union Hospital Wuhan, who established a program of cooperation with Swansea University's School of Medicine. In September 2013, a blue plaque was unveiled in memory of John outside Ebenezer Chapel, Swansea, where he worshipped as a boy. There is also a Swansea street named after him.
Admiral Algernon Walker Heneage Vivian, CB, MVO, DL, was born on the 4th of February 1871 and was a senior Royal Navy officer of the early 20th century. He was the third son of Major Clement Walker Heneage of Compton Bassett, Wiltshire, and Henrietta Letitia Victoria. He was educated in part at Stubbington House School in Hampshire, known as the cradle of the Royal Navy. The surname of Algernon Walker Heneage Vivian was assumed by royal licence in 1921. Algernon Walker Heneage joined the Royal Navy in 1886 as a midshipman on the battleship HMS Triumph, commanded by Algernon Heneage, a distant relative. Afterwards, he served on HMS Arthur in the Pacific and was promoted to commander in 1900. He served in many parts of the world, including Ladysmith, South Africa, when he was part of the contingent sent to defend the town during the Second Boer War. In 1907, he was promoted to captain and put in command of the mine layer HMS Hyacinth. He was given command of the first squadron of mine layers in 1908. Following the outbreak of the First World War in 1914, he commanded the battleship HMS Albion. He took the ship on a secret naval mission to collect gold bullion from South Africa and was afterwards part of the naval support at the Gallipoli landings. In 1915 to 1916, he was Commodore commanding small vessels in the eastern Mediterranean, including 160 minesweepers. And in 1916-1917, he was in charge of the Allied barges across the Strait of Otranto. He became senior British naval officer in Italy and was promoted to Rear Admiral in 1918, and was then appointed aide-de-camp to King George V in 1917-18. When he retired from active service in 1920, he was promoted in retirement to Vice Admiral, which took place on the 8th of October 1923. He was promoted to Admiral on the 1st of August in 1927. He was invested as a member of the Royal Victorian Order in 1904 and a companion of the Order of the Bath in the New Year Honours List of 1916. On the 25th of April 1922, he was made a Grand Officer of the Order of the Crown of Italy by the King of Italy. In retirement, he moved to Park Le Breos on the Gower Peninsula near Park Mill, Swansea, which he inherited from the Vivian family. Afterwards, he moved to Klein Castle, Black Pill, Swansea, which was also inherited from the Vivians. It was from this point that he was referred to as the Admiral by the staff and locals. At that time, in 1921, he added the Vivian surname to his own. He served as a Justice of the Peace and a Deputy Lieutenant of Glamorganshire, and was High Sheriff of Glamorgan for 1926 to 27. Algernon Walker Heneage Vivian, the Admiral, died at Klein Castle on the 26th of February 1952, and was laid to rest in the family vault at Klein Church, Blackpill, with other members of his family.
Harry Libby was born George Henry Stevens Libby on the 26th of September 1896. He died on the 10th of October 1964. The street Libby Way is named after renowned Mumbles character Harry Libby, who was born in Mumbles in 1896 and lived in the South End area of Mumbles. Harry was the councillor for Mumbles, and he later became Mayor of Swansea. A veteran of World War I, he was instrumental in setting up the Mumbles United Fund when World War II broke out. He decided to write monthly letters to each of the Mumbles people serving with HM forces. He formed a committee known as the Mumbles Correspondence Committee, which included the Vicar, Canon Wilkinson, George Ace, Mrs Heron and Mr A. Stacey. The aim was to let the lads and lasses know that Mumbles had not forgotten them, to give them some local news and to keep them informed with news of their pals. It was intended to continue the communications throughout the duration of the war, a task they fulfilled until the armistice in 1945. The majority of the letters were written by Councillor Harry Libby. This photograph shows Harry Libby's premises in the Duns, a wartime centre where information about those serving away was gathered and shared. By October 1939, 140 letters were dispatched, increasing by the following month to 600, and by October 1943, they sent 1,200. This report shows what the Mumbles Comfort Fund had achieved between 1939 and 1945. When the service personnel returned home from war, they were presented with a token of appreciation from the Mumbles United Welcome Home Committee. In January 1957, Harry, Libby and a small group made their way to the Mixen Sands. Mixen is a dangerous sandbank which lies just off the coast at Bracelet Bay and is marked with the large red Mixen bell. On this rare occasion, the bank was visible, and to mark the occasion, a small group consisting of Derek Scott, coxswain of the lifeboat, and his father, Les Gwyn John, Assistant Secretary of the Lifeboat Committee and his wife, Stanley Poulton, HM Coast Guard, Tom Wright, Jack Gammon, lifeboat mechanic, Mumble's own Harry Libby, Mayor of Swansea in that year, and Evening Post photographer Harry Hinham planned to hold a tea party on the Mixen Sands. They set off in 2 small boats from the Mumbles Pier, armed with a folding table, 2 stools and a thermos flask of tea, some cups and a few sandwiches. Finding the bank was exposed, they set up the table and chairs and enjoyed their tea and sandwiches before the tide soon turned and they had to re-embark for home. Harry Hinham was the last to leave, enabling him to capture his companions on film, to gain the distinction of being the first newspaper photographer to operate a camera on the Mixen. Harry was also an author, and in 1963 published a book, The Mixture, The Mumbles and Harry Libby.